Welcome, everyone, to the daily market wrap, the biggest charts in 30 minutes. My name is David Zimmerman. I'm the founder of DeFi University.xyz. I think it's probably the best DeFi and crypto educational material in the English language, and it's all free. What we're going to do here this evening is we're going to go ahead and take a look at some digital assets. And, I think it's important that we start to think about buy zones because this bear market is not going to last forever. And if we've got maybe 6 months left on the downside, this bear cycle, well, then we've really got to have some buy zones set for ourselves. So that's what I want to dive into this evening. And the first thing is okay, well, if we're going to try to set buy zones, well, then where do we think Bitcoin and other digital assets can go this bear cycle based on where they went last bear cycle? And so, what I want to do here is take a look at these charts on a weekly. We're going to zoom out to a weekly because if it's true that Bitcoin has a cycle, which clearly it does, then we've probably got several more months left on the downside before we start to get the first rallies, the first new spring, probably in the spring of next year, where we start to get the first real push higher. So, what I'm focused on here for Bitcoin is the 200-week moving average. And just like last cycle, my expectation is that Bitcoin makes a break below its 200-week moving average. Now, if we just take a look at this here, we are very, very close. Here's the 200-week moving average. Now, how far above the 200-week is BTC right now? 15%. So just getting back down to the 200-week moving average would yield a move to the downside of 13%. But if Bitcoin gets to 50K, which is the next level of horizontal support, see that level of horizontal support was resistance. When it broke, it became support. It held as support. And if we get a test of this level of support at some point over the next couple of months, that is my first buy zone for BTC. Now, here's the thing though. Every bear cycle has seen Bitcoin decline by greater than 52%. And Bitcoin has only moved to the downside so far this bear cycle by 52%. Even a move down to 50K would be a decline from the peak of 60%. That would make it one of the shallowest, if not the shallowest, Bitcoin bear market in history. So, do you really think that Bitcoin holds 50K? Or maybe does it make it a touch below 50K, maybe to 40 or 38, somewhere down here? I mean, look, it's certainly possible. But my first buy zone for BTC is 50,000. So what does that mean for all of the altcoins? If I'm short and I'm using no leverage and I plan to close those shorts and initiate some long positions, quite a bit lower. We're talking about a move lower of roughly 25% just out of Bitcoin. So if Bitcoin has another 25% to the downside, in my opinion, and again, I don't have a crystal ball, obviously, but this is my market bias, a little bit bearish here. Let's take a look at some altcoins. Here's ETH. Now, ETH likely has some trend line support coming in at roughly $1,600. So if that's the trend line support for ETH, how far is that to the downside from where ETH is currently trading? 20%. If I think Bitcoin is going to move to the downside by a further 25%, well, then there's no way that ETH holds 1,600. It makes it seem as though it would be more likely to see ETH move down by 40%. If Bitcoin's down by 25%, wouldn't you expect ETH to be down by slightly more, maybe 40%? And that would bring ETH all the way down to like $1,100 or $1,200, where there is some support down here. So I expect 1,600 to break, and I expect ETH to find support and maybe put in a bit of a double bottom. So just take a look at this. If ETH does move down to $1,200 or so, that would be a really nice double bottom down here. So here's the low, here's where the double bottom could come in. And if it's just a little bit higher, if the low is just a little bit higher than it was last cycle, that would give us a double top on the upside and a double bottom on the downside. And my expectation for ETH is that it performs relatively well next bull cycle. Relatively well, probably really well. ETH never got up to its trendline resistance this bull cycle. Bitcoin did get up to its trendline resistance, and Bitcoin got rejected at trendline resistance, as you can see here. Bitcoin made it up to resistance and got rejected at resistance. ETH didn't even get close to getting up to resistance at $8,500 or so this last bull cycle. So my expectation, or what I'm planning to speculate on, is that ETH next bull cycle makes it back at least to 5,000, but probably much higher. So that means if I'm able to pick up ETH at 1,200, man, 1,200 to 5,000 just by holding spot, pretty darn attractive. So my buy zone for ETH is in this box. Let me go ahead and draw this in here. Between 1,600 and 1,200, that is my buy zone for ETH. Here's Solana. Now, my buy zone for Solana is quite a bit lower. But if Bitcoin makes a move down to 50K, then I don't see how Solana would be able to outperform ETH on the downside. If I think ETH is going to decline by 40% and Bitcoin by an additional 25%, well, then how in the world would Sol be down by less than ETH? I think Sol would be down by more than ETH because Sol is a more volatile digital asset than ETH is. So a 60% move to the downside from the current price for Sol makes a lot of sense to me. So down here at 30, that's just above my buy zone. I'll start to buy ETH at like 25, 20, or I'm sorry, this is Sol, at like 25 or 27, something like that, just a little bit down below the top of this buy zone. There's a little bit of support there. So maybe, I'll expand this because nibbling on the long side at 32 at support, that makes sense to me. That would be a 50% move, but I expect Sol to move down into this box. So I'll be a buyer between $9 and $32 for Sol. This is my buy zone for Solana. Now, I want to just gloss over all of the equities real quick. So, just the NASDAQ, we could just take a look at the NASDAQ. Rolling over, very similar pattern to what was put in last year at the same time. So I would really like to see if we can get a little bit more downside. I think any real dip out of the NASDAQ is buyable, especially around 22,500 or so. All right, that's enough for equities for the time being. Let's take a look at Tau, and let's just roll down the list here. So Tau on a weekly, as much as I like the project, it is an altcoin, a high volatility altcoin. So we got some rejection here at this trend line resistance and at this horizontal. So rejected at resistance. The level of support comes in at that tweezer bottom down there at 143. That likely won't hold if Bitcoin moves to the downside by an additional 25% this bear market, this bear cycle. So my expectation for Tau would be a move at least down to 95, 93, something like that. So if I just use a measurement tool here and we measure down to 95, well, that's a 47% move. So that would be about in line with the first buy zone for Sol. That 50% move down for Sol, it's about in line with this 50% move down for Tau. But Tau is a little bit more volatile than Sol. They're about the same, actually. So I would expect maybe a move down to $65 for Tau, something like that. So I'll start buying at 90, but down here at 65, I think makes a lot more sense for Tau. And I would just buy this spot and just hold it spot in a Tau wallet. All right, let's take a look at SUI, one of the smart contract platforms, SUI. And it looks to me as though this green zone down here is the next logical stop for SUI. And to the bottom of that buy zone is negative 60%. So 60% further to the downside out of SUI to get to this level of support. And that's basically the all-time lows in SUI. But if Solana and Tau and ETH and Bitcoin, if Bitcoin moves to the downside by 25%, I would expect SUI to get at least down here to 37 cents. But it could go lower. It can always go lower. But I think 37 cents is a great entry on SUI, on SUI. I'll start buying it at 50 cents though. So this is my buy zone for SUI. I want to go ahead and move that over here. Right here, that's the buy zone. Okay, XRP. So if XRP is able to make it down to 75 cents right here, I'll start to close my shorts. That's where I'll start to close my shorts. Now, I'll probably leave something on just in case it moves additionally down to 55 cents or so, or even all the way down to 30 cents. I'll leave some shorts on once I start to close at 75 cents, but I will not be a buyer of XRP. Here's Arbitrum. Now, I would only buy ARB to speculate that it does some crazy 20 or 30x move. Because this falling wedge is a bit of a bullish pattern. So I just think that if it gets down to 2 or 3 cents, that would make sense where I would start to buy it. I would close my shorts down there and start to buy it. But I'm not convinced of the utility of this governance token. I am short Arbitrum. Here's Aave. I happen to really like Aave, but I would be a buyer of Aave all the way down here at $50. So, between $50 and $60 at the bottom of this green zone down here. Let me go ahead and move it like so. So this down here is where I would start to buy AAVE. I am short Aave. Here's BNB. Now, BNB, precipitous drop. Look at that, really, really fast. Not many other alts have put in sharp moves like that, but it makes sense since you got this euphoria on the way up that you would get real sharp moves down also. So BNB, to me, looks as though it's got some support at its 200-week moving average at $500. But if Bitcoin moves to the downside by 25%, then I don't see how BNB would be able to hold its 200-week moving average and horizontal support at $500. So if BNB puts in a move to the downside that's commensurate with many of the other altcoins, then maybe a 60% move even from these current prices to the downside is in line for BNB. Could be. That would bring it all the way down to $200. So $200, I would actually think about buying BNB if it was down there at 200. I would probably buy some because even though I don't think Binance is a positive actor in the space, if I want to make money, well then $200 for BNB, it likely puts in a big bounce. So I would actually be a buyer of BNB all the way down here at like 200 or so. And I'll just wait and see because right now I'm short. So I'm short BNB. If it breaks support, I think it could be a straight shot down here to 200. We shall see. Arrow. Now, Arrow, I don't think there's any value here. I'm not convinced that this token is worth anything. So I wouldn't necessarily be a buyer of it at all. But if Arrow puts in a move that is similar in magnitude to, ETH on the downside, then that would take it, if it's only 40% on the downside from here, then that would take it to 18 cents. Now, the problem with that idea is that this move straight up happened basically in just a couple of days, not even. So a move straight down would make sense too. And the level of support is all the way down here at like 13 cents. So a move down to 13 cents makes a bit more sense to me. And that would be 60% on the downside from where Arrow is currently trading. So 60% on the downside would be in line with many of the other high volatility altcoins. Speaking of high volatility altcoins, here's Fartcoin. Now, Fartcoin, my expectation is for this to go to zero. And, I would actually close the short probably towards the bottom of this. I'm going to go ahead and bring that up like so. So I'll start to I'll probably just exit the position entirely at 7. So something like this, 7 cents down here for Fartcoin. I don't need to try to catch the bottom tick, and 60% on the downside would be in line with the other alts that I've been watching here. So I am short Fartcoin. Here's AVAX, and AVAX is literally clinging to a level of support that it needs to hold if it is going to have any shot at holding above its lows from last, basically like right after it launched. So down at $3, that would make sense for AVAX. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and move this box here down to the bottom right there. So this is the buy zone that I've got for AVAX. I am not in any positions on AVAX right now. I'm just watching this one from the sidelines. Here's ETHFI. Now, this one, not convinced of the utility here, and obviously neither is the market. But this does look like a big flag. You see this flag? So if I just go ahead and grab that brush, here's the flag pole, and then all of this is inside and down sloping. So this is basically one gigantic flag. Now, I know that you're not supposed to really break below the middle of the pole, but I just want to throw that out there. It kind of does look like a big flag to me. I would not be a buyer of ETHFI, even though I really like their products. So here's Doge. I am not in any Doge positions, but it looks as though a decent level of support on Doge could come in right about right there, the bear market lows from last cycle. And so if we go ahead and measure that, that would be, from the current price, 45% to the downside. So if I expect other altcoins to decline by 50% or 60%, then I would expect Doge, which is a very high volatility meme coin, to move to the downside by greater than 45%. So if it does that, then we might see it get down below 5 cents. So down below 5 cents, there's a problem. There's no real support down here. There's nothing going on down here. Doge hasn't seen, 4-cent territory since 2021. So that would be a sharp move lower potentially with, an ultimate bottom at a penny. So yeah, I'm just not convinced that this 5-cent level holds. I have no position in Doge. Okay, so here's SPX 6,900, and decent bounce. But this bounce is taking place within this clearly bearish downtrend here. So, this one to me probably goes to zero this cycle. I have no position in SPX. Here's Link. Now, Link, very useful protocol, Chainlink is, but how exactly does the token fit into all that? And how does the token accrue value? Does it? I am not convinced that it does in any way. So maybe a buyer of Link down here at $5 or so. But let's just go ahead and measure that, because if Link moves to the downside and makes it all the way down to $5, that's only 46% to the downside from the current price for Link. So if I expect other alts to move to the downside by greater than 46%, then there's no way that Link holds this $5 level. And so if Link can't hold that $5 level, then where could it go from there? Well, probably all the way down to it could go down to $1 or $2. That would be the very bottom from, basically at the beginning of last bull cycle. So, or 2 bull cycles ago, actually. So yeah, it's not looking good for Link. It would really need to hold $5, because holding $5 would, it would mean that it would be outperforming other alts if it's able to hold $5. So let's see what happens here. But I would be a buyer of Link at $3. So let me go. I'm going to move that down a little bit further here. So because I don't think it's likely that it just holds $5. I have no position in Link, but I would be a buyer down here between, let's say, $2.75 and maybe $5 or so. So XMR, Monero, these privacy protocols, they're going to have their lunch eaten by Bitcoin, Lightning, and Nostr. So I'm not convinced of the use case for this, but I could see this actually outperforming other alts on the way down. Simply, all I mean by that is it doesn't decline by as much. So maybe there's 40% left on the downside out of XMR after it broke support, put in that really big topping tail and then broke support on the way down, putting in a bit of a bear flag right now, and probably moves down to its 200-week moving average all the way down at $200. That's 43% of the downside. And if it outperforms other alts, then it would decline by a smaller percentage amount than other alts. So XMR, I might actually buy at 200, but I would wait. I would wait until it gets down into this green buy zone right here. So I'm going to go ahead and move this buy zone into view a little bit more. There we go. Something like that. That makes sense to me. So I'm just going to watch on the sidelines as XMR plays out. Okay, Ondo. Now, on-chain bonds, but I'm not quite sure what the token does. It's not like the token is a basket of treasuries. The token is what, governance or something like that? So no wonder this thing has declined from peak to trough by, I think, like 90%. Yeah, 90%. Wow, it's gotten just crushed. So I'm not convinced of the use case for the Ondo token. That says nothing of on-chain treasuries, but just what's the purpose of the Ondo token. So I would expect this to actually break its low. There we go. That should be working now. I think I may have had a problem with my microphone there for a second. This little device on my shirt I think the battery died. Stupid battery. That's what happens when you wear it all day and you don't charge it, huh? You probably should be charging the thing. So, but Tron here just absolutely crushing it. Now you can hold this just spot in many different hardware wallets, and if I wanted to hold something that seems like it's been outperforming just about everything else, Tron would fit the bill. This type of outperformance, I mean, if we just measure from the 200 weekly moving average all the way down there, that's been a 6x. So Tron's one of the best performing digital assets this cycle, without a doubt. I want to move this one up my watch list here. So I'm short all of these. I'm going to leave this one right here, right below Fortcoin. Okay, so we got 4 minutes left. How about Ton? I used to really like Ton because I thought that, all that built-in user base of what, like millions upon millions of people that use Telegram monthly, I thought that that would accrue value to the Ton token, but I was wrong. It didn't. And it seems as though Ton, it's actually been outperforming many of the other digital assets on the way down. It hasn't seen the same type of crash as many of the others have, not in the same percentage terms, but it would not surprise me to see Ton make it all the way down to its flash crash lows here at 58 cents. I would actually be a buyer of Ton at 58 cents because I quite like this protocol. Here's Caspa. Now, I always was rooting for Caspa. I thought that it could be really cool. And this is a beautiful bullish pattern. So this is a falling wedge. We've got resistance, resistance, and support, support. The only problem is that if it falls out of this falling wedge to the downside, if it breaks down, well, then support comes in all the way down here, 1.1 cents. And if we measure how far to the downside that is, that's an additional 60%, which would be about in line with other digital assets. But I would definitely be a buyer of Caspa at a penny. Um, yeah, I remember, watching some guys who were mining Caspa years ago, years and years ago. It must have been 2022, and they were talking about picking up Caspa and what happens if it goes to a penny, what happens if it goes to a dime, and there were guys who, if they had held their Caspa that they mined all the way up to the 20-cent highs, would have made tens of millions of dollars off of it. So I hope they did. I really hope they did. And I'll be a buyer of Caspa down here at a penny. So, if you were mining Caspa at a fraction of a penny, even at a penny, you're doing really, really well. So you might just be able to hold and do nothing. And that's the power of getting a good entry. So I want to go ahead and throw down a buy zone here for Caspa. And that's going to be the last one that we have time for this evening. So I want to thank everyone for joining. I really appreciate you all for hopping on these live calls. If you find value in the TA and you want to learn more about crypto and DeFi, well, we've put out what I think is the best educational material in the English language for crypto and DeFi. It's all free. Take a look at us on the School community, school.com/DeFi University, or the website, defiuniversity.xyz. Thanks so much for joining live, and I will see each and every one of you tomorrow. And tomorrow is going to be at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Have a good one.